This is an analysis from Alpha Business Media. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a systemic crisis that's unfolding right now in the heart of the Himalayas. And what our source material makes crystal clear is that while all the headlines focus on the melting glaciers up high, the real catastrophe is happening far below. It's in the valleys, in the villages, where a really dangerous chain reaction has already started. This statement from our source report just perfectly captures the urgency. See, this isn't just some abstract environmental issue. It's a crisis that begins with people. You can picture it, right? Apple farmers in Mustang, a region that was once famous for its incredible harvests, are now just watching their orchards, their entire way of life wither away because the snows they've always depended on, well, they just don't fall anymore.
And the data? Well, it backs us up with some pretty stark clarity. The key insight here is how all these different risks are converging. I mean, look at this. Nepal ranks 10th on the Global Climate Risk Index. Its temperatures are rising way faster than the global average, and it's facing a potential hit to its GDP of up to 7%. So this isn't some distant threat we're talking about. It's an economic and social reality, and it's happening right now.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this crisis, we have to see it as a chain reaction, a series of dominoes. Let's take a look at the very first domino to fall, the foundation of Nepal society. It's agriculture. And we're not talking about some minor sector here. Agriculture is literally the backbone of the entire nation. It employs over 60% of the workforce and makes up nearly a quarter of the GDP. So you can imagine, when this pillar starts to crack, the whole structure is at risk.
The first crack? It's all about water. A staggering 75% of Nepal's agriculture is completely rain-fed. That means it's totally exposed to these wild, erratic monsoons and drying springs that communities have relied on for centuries.
And then the plagues arrive. You see, warming temperatures are letting new pests and diseases creep into higher altitudes that were always naturally protected by the cold. Our data shows that now over half, more than 50% of all farming households are reporting infestations from totally new kinds of insects. And this all translates directly into economic devastation. We're not just talking about a few lost crops. This is a systemic threat. Over just the last 5 years, direct agricultural losses are estimated at an incredible $3.1 billion. That's forcing a massive wave of migration out of rural areas. All right, so let's move to the next link in this chain and see how the problem builds. With its agricultural base eroding, Nepal is betting its whole future on hydropower. They call it green gold. But here's the thing. Climate change is turning that dream into a really, really dangerous paradox. And the ambition here is huge. The plan is to generate enough power not just for themselves, but to become a major energy exporter to India and Bangladesh. It's a strategy that's designed to fuel the nation's economic growth for decades to come. But this grand ambition is facing a truly catastrophic threat. And to understand it, we need to quickly define a critical term. A GLOF. A glacial lake outburst flood isn't just any old flood. No, this is a sudden, violent release of a massive wall of water, mud and rock from a melted glacier. It's powerful enough to obliterate everything in its path, dams, power lines, entire towns, for 100 kilometers downstream. And this slide just lays out the twin dangers facing Nepal's energy strategy so clearly. On the one hand, you have that sudden, catastrophic risk of a GLOF just wiping out a multi-billion-dollar investment in an instant. But on the other hand, you have this slow, chronic risk of unreliable river flows, which cause power deficits and just slowly chip away at the long-term economic viability of these projects. Now, this cascade, it doesn't stop with energy. It's now hitting another absolutely vital economic artery by eroding the very product Nepal sells to the world, its iconic, majestic landscape. The term the report uses is brand destruction. I mean, think about it. For a country whose entire global identity is built on these majestic, snow-capped Himalayan peaks, climate change is a direct assault on its unique selling point. The very image that draws hundreds of thousands of visitors every year is literally melting away. And the impacts are coming from all sides. The famous white peaks, they're becoming bare, black rock. Melting permafrost is destabilizing popular trekking trails, which makes them way more dangerous. And these unpredictable, violent storms now hit even during peak season, endangering lives and destroying the kind of reliability the industry absolutely depends on. So, the final domino in this chain reaction really reveals the deep human cost of this crisis. Climate change is now acting like a disease vector and a stress multiplier. It's creating an invisible epidemic that is just overwhelming an already fragile national health system. So how does that actually happen, right? How does a change in temperature and rainfall actually translate into a nationwide health crisis?
This phrase from the source report just nails it. It perfectly describes the most alarming trend. Diseases that used to be confined to the hot, tropical lowlands are now on the move, literally following the rising temperatures up into the mountains.
The crisis really hits on three fronts. First, you've got mosquito-borne diseases like dengue fever showing up in high-altitude regions for the very first time. Second, erratic rains and droughts contaminate water sources, and that leads to cholera outbreaks. And then finally, there's this immense psychological toll, what experts are calling eco-anxiety and solastalgia, which is this deep distress caused by environmental change as people lose their homes, their livelihoods, and their whole sense of place.
So, what's the way forward? When you're facing such a deeply interconnected crisis, isolated single-sector fixes, well, they're just doomed to fail. The only solution requires a systemic shift in thinking, from just managing a cascade of failures to actively building a cascade of resilience.
But the scale of this challenge is just enormous. The estimated funding gap for Nepal to adapt to these changes and build that resilience, it's as high as $47.4 billion by 2030. That's a colossal sum for one of the world's least developed countries.
The path forward demands a strategic pivot, a real break from the old models. The recommendations all focus on building systems that are diversified and adaptable. So, investing in resilient, decentralized energy instead of just mega dams, promoting climate-smart agriculture with drought-resistant crops, diversifying tourism so it's not all about the peaks, and proactively building a healthcare system that can actually handle these new climate-driven threats. And this really leaves us with the ultimate question. And it's a question that goes way beyond just Nepal and speaks to a challenge the entire world is now facing. In an era of interconnected systems and accelerating shocks, how do we transform a chain reaction of failures into a self-reinforcing cycle of resilience?